I called out some bad things and I wrote this piece in Adweek, and then, I got to wear a suit and do all that things and do some good speeches and then run this program. I can't just stop there, because what kind of precedent does that set for the next versions of me and you, Hannah? It sets a bad precedent because they think that's the ceiling. They think, oh, I can only take it this far. They need to see how far we can take it, because they need to understand that this fight has no limit. This fight only has the limit of how far and how much we call out the bad things that happen to us.
Welcome to The Tiger in the Room. My name is Hannah, and I'll be your host. We are a podcast series that is here to talk about the current and ongoing national crisis of anti-Asian hate crimes. A lot of us first heard about anti-Asian hate in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. We believe that hate against Asians and Asian Americans is not just seen in acts of violence. It is also seen when our community is silenced, invisibilized, and erased. We plan to talk about the challenges that modern-day Asian Americans face every day, whether it's in the workplace, in public, in media, and so on. We also talk to the organizers, activists, and change makers who are fighting for our community and fighting for change. We hope you'll join us. Our guest today is Eric Toda, Global Head of Social Marketing at Meta, which some of us may know as formerly Facebook. He is also the head of Meta Prosper, which is a program started to support Asian and Pacific Islander-owned small businesses. Meta Prosper holds live networking events, provides training to small business owners, and other resources to help AAPI entrepreneurs. Eric is also an angel investor, namely with Hyphen Capital, which is a venture capital firm based in San Francisco, which seeks to invest in multi-stage companies started by AAPI founders. He is also on the board of the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center, the Asian American Foundation, and Leading Asian Americans to Unite for Change. We talked to Eric about his personal experience growing up and navigating his own Asian American identity as a fifth-generation Japanese American, how he got to start as an activist, and his perspective on what are the current challenges facing Asian Americans today, and how he uses his current platform to be an advocate. This interview with Eric Toda was recorded on November 2nd, 2022. So, Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about this. I'm excited to do this. I'm excited for this conversation. And most of all, just excited to spend time with you.
Thank you. We're excited too. Yeah, so let's get right into it. You have a very interesting story. You're fifth generation Japanese American. Some of the things that you've mentioned to me about your family's history is just really fascinating to me personally, because you can see a lot of the different historic moments within Asian American history being a part of that. So can you share a little bit with us about that?
Yeah, as you mentioned, multi-generational Asian American on my Japanese side. I'm my father's Japanese American and my mother is Filipino from the Philippines. So I'm very much closer to the Philippines than I am to Japan, mostly because my mother was born there. But like you mentioned, my family has been in America. At least the Toda name has been in America for 4 generations before me. So pre-Gold Rush. So when you talk about historical events and us being witness to it, whether that be the Chinese Exclusion Act, living through the Japanese incarceration, then having the people who are incarcerated join the 442nd Regiment, which is still the U.S. Army's highest decorated regiment, which is all Japanese Americans. We have been witness to all of these events, which makes us not just deeply American, probably more American than many of you listening today, and probably more American than if you turn on the TV than most of the people that you'll see on TV. And that needs to be said, because a lot of times you forget that someone who looks like me can be deeply American, that you probably assume that my family immigrated here just, before I was born, or I was born in another country. I've actually been asked many times if I've been born in another country. I wasn't. I was born here. My father was born here. My grandfather was born here, and his father was born here, all in California. So, I think my journey to you, Hannah, is one of, I think, finding my own self, finding my own identity, finding my place in American history, and finding where I can contribute, to the future for people who look like me and you. I've always struggled, to be fair, with my identity and ethnicity, because I grew up in a predominantly white town, and I didn't see myself in that town, in the classroom. And even though I didn't speak another language, still don't, even though I identify more with American culture than most other Asian cultures, I was still seen as the most Asian person some people have ever seen. And then I go to San Francisco to be with my cousins and hang out, and they grew up around only Asian people, and they spoke multiple languages. And they told me, I'm not Asian at all. I'm actually a white guy and that looks Asian. And so I've always been on this spectrum of Asian and not Asian, but I've always felt that I can't possibly be the only one. I can't possibly be the only one that is multi-generational American, that identifies more with other cultures because I don't see my own, that identifies with other communities because I didn't see my own. I always felt like I couldn't possibly be the only one, even though in many cases, whether it be how I grew up or entering into industries that were predominantly white, I was the only one. And so I think that I've always felt this journey was similar to probably what my father felt or what my grandfather felt, but I always knew, I had a long lineage of being American, deeply rooted into this country because of just literally just surviving generations to be here.
I think that's so incredible because a lot of Asian Americans, I think, are still unaware of the history of our community in this country, which goes back to, like you said, the gold rush, or the transcontinental railroads, moments in history where we've really carved our place out in this country and contributed to, building this country. I do feel the mainstream narrative, though, about what it means to be an Asian American, it tends to focus a lot on the experiences of, recent immigrants or being a child of an immigrant. As someone who, like you said, you're on your father's side, your grandparents were born here, great grandparents. What was it like for you to kind of find your place in that narrative? Or, did you always feel like you had to kind of compare yourself to that narrative?
Media and typically recent history has focused on the immigration point, right? Your first generation or your second generation, and you're finding your way in this country. And that's because that's a success story. That's a nice story, right? You come to this country, you study really hard, you go to the best schools possible, and then all of a sudden you become a doctor and cure AIDS. I think that is a success story that is shiny. Narratives and culture narratives as a whole don't want to embrace things that are more ugly, like our history in this country generations ago. Again, the Chinese Exclusion Act was the first and only law to be enacted against a specific race of people. Now, you may say, but what happened in 2016 with the travel ban? And while that was a specific action and move, that was not law. Chinese Exclusion Act was a legit law. The Japanese incarceration of the 1940s, we saw a little bit of that after 9/11. And we said, no way, that can't happen in this country. We can't put every single, Arab and Hindu and Muslim in camps. We can't do that, not in this country. Well, guess what we did in the 1940s to an entire race of people who were born here. And it ruined families. It ruined my family. I didn't know I had, multiple great aunts and uncles because after the camps, they dispersed across America. I only knew the ones that I knew, not the 5 that I didn't know. So you tore families apart because of these laws. And those are ugly, ugly, ugly truths. And of course, you don't want to talk about that. But we talk about slavery because we need to learn. We talk about the Holocaust because we need to learn. And I think now more than ever, we need to talk about the things that we have gone through as a community and the nuances within each of the communities that have silenced us, that have made us blind to our place in American history. And I do think some of that is very ugly, but it's necessary to learn from, because if you learn about the history of a people in the United States, when you talk about the immigrant story, when you talk about the immigrant success story, know that that is only a success because of the people that came before it. Because we have seen so many times before where maybe there's not a people before it, but people immigrate here and they're treated wrongly, they're treated poorly. And we need to learn from that, because that is just history repeating itself. So again, I think when it comes to my story, I'm very proud of it, even though it is ugly. And I'm very proud of it, even though my grandparents didn't talk about it, even though they didn't talk about a lot of the pain that they faced. But I talk about it now because hopefully it'll allow other grandchildren like me to speak about what they learned and what they know, so that we don't forget, so that we don't repeat those mistakes into the future.
Absolutely. I think especially there's something inherently Asian about us not wanting to talk about the ugly side of our past either. Like my grandparents are from Korea, and I never heard them talk about what they went through, prior to like the Korean War. It's something that's just not really discussed. And I think we also as a community sometimes have a tendency to not want to bring up things that are hurtful or painful or make us feel ashamed. History does repeat itself, and we need to understand that, this kind of racialization and otherness is still continuing. What was your experience like in terms of feeling othered?
I still feel like I'm an other, even within our own community, to be fair. You hear this voice, you hear how I tell these stories. There's not a lot of me's out there, that do what I do, how I do it. And I think that immediately makes me feel like I'm an other, even in my own skin. But the difference is I have more confidence now because of what I've done in my career and how I've been able to navigate it, but that confidence has been built over years, because it's, I guess my skin has gotten thicker. Now, I've felt like an other since I was a little boy, whether again, like you're sitting in your second grade class, only surrounded by kids that don't look like you, and you don't see yourself in a history book, but you see other people. You see indigenous people and their time in California. You see, what the Jews had to go through the Holocaust. You saw what the Black community had to go through slavery. And then you uniquely feel, because you're in an American history book, that they are American. Then you don't see yourself. You don't see people that look like you. And immediately, not only do you feel like, wait a second, like, but I thought I was born here. I thought my grandparents were born here, And then you have those heads turn. You're like, well, you're not in this book, man. Like, you don't belong. And you start to feel different. And when you're a little kid, you don't want to be different, because people make fun of you. Kids can be very, very cruel, and they make fun of you for being different. They make fun of you for doing something that's not like them. And when everybody brings a ham sandwich and you bring a Spam musubi, and that's your favorite food, and you get made fun of, you don't want to be who you are. You look in the mirror and you don't want to look like you. You just want a ham sandwich, even though that's nasty. But you ask for a ham sandwich from your mom because you know that that's going to be okay. That's like your pass to not getting made fun of. And then you grow up and you deal with this, time and time again. You play sports, and, kids that don't know you, they do the slanty-eyed thing on the playground, or you're playing against another team from another town and they don't know you. So they decide, we're going to run our mouths against this kid that, has some level of athletic ability, but, they don't look like you. And so you get to be ridden the entire game. It's homecoming, and you ask, girls to homecoming, and there's only white girls, and they say things like, well, I'm sorry, Eric, I don't like Asian guys. How do you think you're going to feel about who you are and how you look and what that says about your place? And it's through those experiences that build the confidence that you hear in this voice today, but also knowing that in many cases, while I've had made my place in corporate America, while I have made my place in the marketing and advertising industry, while I have made my place in our own community, as a leader for, our generation, I still don't feel like I belong because I don't feel like I'm Asian enough to go to the boba meetups or the movie premiere of a specific Asian film that's only in Chinese or Korean, because I don't speak those languages, but I still don't feel as comfortable when I'm the only Asian guy amongst a bunch of white guys, white executives, because I know I need to consider how I come off, what I talk about, how I talk about it, and that pressure is bone crushing every single day. But I've done it for so damn long. That it just rolls off the back now. This is just what I have to deal with. And I think a little bit ago, maybe it was because I was traveling so much and maybe because I'm just so tired. I just realized that there's a potential where the outcomes that I'm fighting for our community, I might not see. And all that means is that I'm just a bridge towards the beginning and the end. And you know what happens to bridges, Hannah? They get stepped on. And it just dawned on me the other day where the future that I want for my kids, hopefully my kids see it, but there's a chance that I don't see it. And to realize that, going what I've gone through, hearing what I do on a daily basis, even from our own community, it's isolating, right? But you get used to it because you know your purpose and you know what you're fighting for and you know who you're representing, even though you don't feel like you belong on either end of the spectrum.
I feel you on that on so many different levels. Because I think there are, a lot of us who are in this fight, and you're right. I don't think the change we want to see may happen in our lifetime. When you look at, how long it took for the Black community to just even achieve like the rights that we all have now, it was literally decades and decades of people pushing the needle forward. I want to get into, your advocacy work. You're involved in a lot of, different organizations, but it all kind of started with an article that you wrote for Adweek. It was called "My People Are Dying in Silence and I'm Here with a Megaphone." And I remember reading it actually when it came out. And you specifically called out the marketing and the advertising industries for not speaking up about anti-Asian hate. Was it nerve-wracking when you decided to publish that? What went into your thought process, like as you were getting ready to, go public with that?
I wrote that piece in February of 2021. It was right after the Super Bowl. And the Super Bowl, for any marketing and advertising person, is one of the biggest moments of the entire year because you get to see the greatest work on stage. I've had the pleasure and honor of working on Super Bowl spots in my career, winning spots, not meaning that the activations that we do, whether it be through Beyonce or Airbnb or calling out a presidential administration, for not accepting brown people like myself, it becomes a point in time in which you're like, this is the best of the best. And what I found while watching the Super Bowl is that there were many commercials and ads that were talking about hope, that were talking about we made it through November. We made it through the summer of Black Lives Matter, and now we can move on. There's a new day. The issue that I had with that is that the week before the Super Bowl, there were 5 straight attacks against the Asian American community in which 2 people died, one of which looked exactly like my grandfather. And so that rejiggered a memory of when I was 14, where my grandfather was targeted in a racially motivated hate crime in San Francisco. They never found who did it, but I remember thinking in my head, I wish I could do more. But I couldn't. I was in high school. And that triggered moment unraveled a lot of mental issues that I had, that I was suppressing. And I realized while sitting there looking at my kids, who are multi-ethnic, they're Asian and Jewish, and realizing that no one is fighting for them. No one's fighting for them. No celebrities are talking about what's happening to the community. No nonprofits, nothing. No one's talking about it. And I realized that I've spent 18 years of my career only focused on myself. Focus on myself and make sure I get the bonuses, the awards, ton of awards. And that I've built this platform for myself in the marketing and advertising industry in which maybe they'll listen to me. Maybe they'll listen to me if I make them realize that 20% of the marketing and advertising industry is Asian American. And while this is happening against the community, they're not saying anything. Unlike when in 2017, the entire marketing and advertising industry snapped to during the Me Too movement, or snapped to during Black Lives Matter. Where were they right now? And so I wrote the piece, and then I sat on it for about a week. Adweek knew I wrote the piece, and I cried for 3 times that week. Every time I read it, I cried because I didn't know if this was my place to say it. I didn't know if anybody was going to read it, and I didn't know if it was going to mean anything. I've been told for so long that I need to keep my head down, be quiet, focus on myself, and self-enrich. Don't fight for other people. It's not what we do. And I felt like I was breaking a verbal bond that I had between my parents and me, in which I was becoming, I wanted to speak out against not just what's happening to our community, but really speak out against them, because they told me not to do it. They told me not to write it. They told me that it could embarrass them if it doesn't go right. And so I cried 3 times that week. I didn't sleep for 3 days straight because I was so nervous that no one was going to read it. And then it took a couple friends to say, if you don't do it, Eric, who will? And so I sent it in, and they were like, well, okay, Eric, we're going to launch this on the eve of Lunar New Year on this Friday. And I was like, no, you can't launch it on a Friday. Like a Friday before a 3-day weekend. Like now no one will definitely read it, because it's who's going to read something on a Friday? Like I'm going to throw up. And I remember not sleeping that entire night. And I remember at 5 o'clock in the morning, I look down on my phone and I see thousands of messages, thousands of emails. I see thousands of DMs on Instagram. And I get a note from Adweek saying that the site is down. They had to remove the paywall. They had to remove everything. Like they just couldn't handle the traffic. And at that moment, I cried again because I realized I might be speaking for a lot of people. And for me, I still struggle with what that means. I've spoken in front of the Bidens. I've spoken in front of the Senate. But when I think about this and I retell it again in my head, I still don't know what it means, because you imagine yourself in that situation over and over again. What would I do? What would I do? And then you do it. And it doesn't play out the way you want it to, because you don't really know what to expect. But then there's this pressure, there's this weight that then comes over you to say, what are you going to do next? What else happens after this? And I find myself in an Instagram live with Henry Golding talking about the piece. I find myself on CNN, on MSNBC, on local TV, NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, talking about why I wrote this piece. And my only hope throughout all that was that I wouldn't be the last one talking, that someone else would start talking, that someone else more prominent than me, a celebrity, better looking, more eloquent, would start to speak up. But no one came. And it took 2 weeks. It took actually Atlanta to happen for it to really catch fire, and for people to really realize what I was saying was hopefully important, that speaking up for our community I wasn't some outlier. I wasn't some anomaly. That what I represent hopefully was a new generation of Asian Americans that are on more equilibrium to fight for our lives, fight for our voices, and fight against history that has always pulled us back to be invisible. And it took my first TV interview where I had to stop the interview because my wife sends me a picture of my son watching me live on TV for me to realize that what I've done and what I am potentially becoming is never going to go away. That now my entire life is dedicated to making sure my kids have a better future, even if it's a future that I will not see, because I refuse to let them remember me as just a businessman or a marketer. That I want them to remember me as someone that just fought for them.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I think if anything, 2020 and 2021 were the years that a lot of us in the community felt we finally had permission to speak out about the things that we've been thinking and feeling and suppressing our whole lives about being Asian, the microaggressions, like the little things even, like we never felt we had permission to even speak about that. Unfortunately, you're right. It did take a major tragedy like Atlanta for people to finally believe us, which is kind of crazy. But I think, when you're one of the first to be bold enough to just say something, I think, people remember that for sure. So no, that's really incredible. Do you think the industry has gotten better?
I think in pockets that's true. I think in the short term, I think immediately you saw my former brands speak out. You saw Nike, a great Nike ad that says, we denounce hate and we stand by the Asian American community, which was fantastic to see, especially because I faced a ton of racism while I was there. I think that in the immediate, I think you saw brands listen, because not me, but powerful people other than me, alongside me were sharing what I wrote. And so I think people listen. Powerful people that manage the agencies that those brands listen to were listening. But in the long term, I think it's very typical in which people move on to the next thing. They have compassion fatigue. Ukraine happened. The Roe v. Wade happened, and all those are very important. Don't get me wrong. I want to make sure you know of that. But I don't think there needs to be fatigue. I just think there needs to be more compassion opening. We need to understand that we are actually in the middle of a much larger cultural awakening from 2017 to today, and that will continue to go on, in which we are actively questioning how we treat people. We are actively questioning how we see people. We are actively questioning, are we actually fighting for the equality of these people, or are we fighting just for ourselves and other people have to get cast aside? I think we are in a massive cultural awakening, and eventually we'll look back on it like the 1960s. And while that was federally driven, this is societal driven. And we'll look back and say a lot changed. And so I think you see it in pockets in corporate America. You haven't seen an uptick in board director roles that look like me. I think we're still fighting for that. I don't think you're seeing an uptick in executive roles that look like me. We're still fighting for that. But you're starting to see programs, which is a good step. You're starting to see programs like Netflix Golden or Meta Prosper, which I've been honored to run and lead as lighthouses for how you can not just build for our community, but see it as just smart business, which is true. We're the fastest growing population in America, half of that fueled by immigration. And if you're not keen to this, other people will talk to that community, build trust with them, and they will love your products more than you. Yeah. And so I think people are starting to realize, corporations are starting to realize, oh, this isn't just like the right thing to do, or like at least what I think is the right thing to do, but rather this is the right thing to do for the business. And so I don't think it's moving fast enough. I could probably tell you that the Black community feels the same about Black Lives Matter. You probably feel the same way. I know I feel the same way about Me Too. I think it runs its course, but I think as it runs its course, that's when it means the most. That's when you see who's here for the ride. That's when you see who's here for the fight, right? And I think it's moments like these, not the moments like right after I wrote the piece, that really matter. Yeah. Because I think this is the people that are going to carry it forward like a bridge to see that outcome.
What do you think these brands could be doing better to be an ally to the Asian community? I mean, I don't think I'm being politically incorrect by saying Asian Americans, we love big brands. Like we love mainstream brands. We have the potential, if we really got together to sway these brands using like our buying power and our buying influence too. But like, what is it that these companies can do? It's easy to issue a statement, and it's also easy to say, you're setting up a new D&I initiative, but what can they do better to really support the community?
I mean, you got to put in the work, right? You got to encourage the conversation. I think you need to encourage the showcasing of the uncomfortable truths of the employee base. Most corporations that talk to me, they've asked me like, well, Eric, what's the first thing that you would do? And I would say, well, take a look at your employee base. How many people do you employ that represent this community? Now disaggregate that and say, of that pot, how many are male? How many are female? Oh, there's less female than male. That's an issue. Now disaggregate that even further. How many then are representative across East Asian, Southeast Asian, South Asian, West Asian, et cetera? Oh, those numbers are only disproportionately skewed towards East Asian. That's an issue. Now allow those people who are not necessarily represented to say what they need to say. And your job is to hear them. Your job is to say, oh, we haven't invested in training. We haven't invested in nuance understandings. Oh, our DEI training is only a binary black and white relationship. It doesn't account for South Asian nuances against East Asian nuances. So I think that's a big thing, is actually investing in your people, investing in the time that it takes to understand who they are versus saying on a flat base, like, yeah, 20% is representative of the Asian American community. So that's pretty good. But then ask yourself, of that 20%, how many are in management? And you see that number dwindle to single digits. And then you have to ask yourself why. So again, it's encouraging the conversation, but looking internally at your own data to say, oh, wait, we actually have never looked at this data before. Now, what are we going to do about it? Because just having an ERG is not enough. Again, just being able to bring people together to meet up for boba is not enough. It's just not enough. And while it's great, and there are a lot of people
right now.
hey, you know what? It's necessary though. Like, again, like I think it's absolutely necessary to bring people together to enjoy those pleasantries for sure. Right. And I think it makes me proud that exists, because 20 years ago it didn't. 15 years ago it didn't. So that makes me proud, right? But it can't just stop there. It can't, because you push so far just to have a place to congregate as your own skin, and all you have are these little topical interactions. There's got to be more. You're smarter than that. You're better than that. You're stronger than that. Like, how can we do that? How can we do more than just that? And I think that's the challenge that I have for most corporations is, great, you have an ERG. Great, you support us. That's absolutely correct. But what else happens next? How are you going to build better bridges between us and the Black community, us and the Hispanic community? How are you going to build better bridges so that we rise together, so that you as a business are stronger? And guess what? More people will want to work for you.
Diversity in the workplace is a whole other topic, especially when it comes to Asian Americans. I mean, there are studies that show Asian Americans feel the least included in the workplace. I think you're right. I don't think we as a community hold these companies accountable enough. Like, how are you supporting us, right? Like, an Asian ERG shouldn't just be it. It should be more than that. I personally don't think we as professionals call that out enough, or we challenge our own companies to do better than that.
I think you have to set better precedents to do that, right? Like, I think there are so many executives in positions at these companies, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but typically they subscribe to just taking us so far.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to get us this far, and after that, I'm probably not going to challenge, and I'm just going to stick to my little protected zone. And they see things that I do. They see how I talk. Again, like, the way I do it is I'm pretty unafraid to challenge, mostly because my time is short. I'm almost 40. I don't have a lot of time left, especially with the death threats that I get. So I think the thing is, it's that I need to make good use of this. And I can't just sit around and feel comfortable with just saying, all right, cool. Like, I called out some bad things and I wrote this piece in Adweek, and then, I got to wear a suit and do all that things and do some good speeches and then run this program. I can't just stop there, because what kind of precedent does that set for the next versions of me and you, Hannah? It sets a bad precedent because they think that's the ceiling. They think, oh, I can only take it this far. They need to see how far we can take it, because they need to understand that this fight has no limit. This fight only has the limit of how far and how much we call out the bad things that happen to us. And if we don't fight and if we don't empower, it's only going to go so far. And I can't live with myself knowing that. And a lot of people say that I'm just full of BS. But the reality is it's true, though. I can't look my kids in the eyes and say that, oh, daddy fought just enough. And then I was like, I'm good. Daddy needs to continue to fight. You need to continue to see me fight, because I'd be damned if something happens to either of my kids and they just say like, it'll work itself out. Kind of like what they told me when my grandfather was beat up. It'll work itself out, Eric. You don't need to catch the people. I'm not good with that. Because that just perpetuates the cycle. I'm trying to break the cycle. I'm trying to hopefully empower the next executives that look like me and you to do it differently, to be more altruistic, to speak up, to not be jealous of each other, to not say, well, he's doing that and she's doing that, it should be me. No. We're increasing the pie and the slices of the pie, not saying we're taking all the pie away. And I think that's what destroys our community and other communities too, is because we think in the scarcity mindset that, like, because we've been taught that for generations, of like, oh, look at this Japanese guy doing this. Like, you're a Korean. You should be better than that. No. That's not going to work anymore. That's just not going to work anymore, because that's not going to help us progress. And so I think, whether it's encouraging and supporting vocally and verbally and visibly other people who are alongside you as peers to do what they do, how they do it, and not say, oh, I wish that was me. Or whether it's helping them do that, helping and supporting them achieve their goals and achieve their mission. Because then if they do it, so can you, and you can rise too. That is honestly the mindset that we need to adopt, because we've been poisoned for so long to think that everybody's against us. Not just other people that don't look like us, but our own people that look like us. We've been poisoned for way too long.
I've had multiple conversations about this with other activists. And something that we almost all universally agree on is that the Asian community also kind of do it to ourselves in a way, where we don't speak up. We compete against each other. I can't tell you how many people at work, when, we started in Asian ERG, they were kind of like, yeah, no, that's not my thing. I don't really need to talk about being Asian at work. We're just not together. And even when, you hear about these hate crimes, you'll find Asian Americans who will say, I don't feel like this personally affects me, because this is not my mom dying. This is not my grandmother getting beaten up. This is like the elephant in the room when we talk about Asian activism. Our community itself just does not come together. How do we change that?
I think it's redefining what the right thing is to do. I think in many cases, the right thing in the previous generations, the right thing is to be selfish. Yeah, just look out for yourself, right? Focus on yourself. Don't focus on anyone else. Like, that's not you. Again, like, if you want to think about this, right? Many cases, the term Oriental was designed to isolate away from Chinese Americans during the Chinese Exclusion Act. Historically, this is historically speaking. Oh, I'm not Chinese, I'm Oriental, right? The same thing with Asian American, Japanese American, etc. In many cases in history, you've always been like, oh, no. I'm not Japanese. I'm Chinese. So please don't take my farm. And if you look at that generational trauma from the Chinese Exclusion Act, Japanese internment camp, the murder of Vincent Chin, where they wrongly believed he was Japanese, in reality, he was not. Of course, people are going to be like, whoa, I'm not Japanese. I'm not taking your jobs. I don't work for Toyota. I don't work for Honda. It's all good. That's generational trauma that is passed on through generations of literally how you survive. How you survive is claiming you are not the other group. We don't live in that world anymore. The world is far more mixed. I'm an example of that as being Filipino and Japanese. And I think more and more into the future, more people will probably be more like me. They'll be mixed, right? And the reality is you will see yourself more as Asian American or American than just one thing hyphen another thing. And I think that we just need to redefine what the right thing is to do. And the right thing isn't just to look out for your own, because that's just, again, a survival tactic of yesterday. And the right thing to do is speak out, challenge. And I think other communities are setting better precedents for us, specifically the Black community. You don't have my voice without the Black community's voice. I promise you that. Some of my greatest allies, some of my greatest supporters are Black. And they have encouraged me to do this. Some of them are my own bosses. Some of my greatest opposition are Asian. And isn't that ironic?
No,
isn't that ironic,
yeah.
right? Some of the greatest people who oppose what I do, how I do it, what I've built are Asian American. And isn't that the crux of what we're talking about today? And that's why I say, again, I look past that and I just say, we just need to redefine, again, what is the right thing to do? And the right thing to do is support incremental changes, progress, versus playing into, well, I don't like him because I didn't do that myself. Or he's not one of mine. He's XYZ community and I'm this community. That's not going to get us very far. In fact, that's just going to isolate us even further and further and further, which then makes us more invisible. And so I think it's just about redefining what the right thing is to do, showing that just because I challenge and I speak like this isn't necessarily the wrong thing. And I'll tell you this, Hannah, a lot of people were against me speaking out even after I wrote the piece. Why is he doing that? He should not be doing that. Well, I don't want him doing that. And then I do it for 2 weeks straight. They realize more people are rallying, more people are gathering up, more people are finding solidarity in the message. And they realize I went into the fire and I didn't die. And that's when they raise their hand and say, well, I think that should have been me. Well, of course you think it should have been me because you didn't die. You didn't go through the gauntlet like I did. You didn't have, mental health issues as you were trying to go to sleep and thinking that you were going to get killed. You didn't ask for security to be deployed against your house. No, you saw that I survived, and therefore you think that you should have been me. And I think that's exactly what's wrong with our community. I don't want you to be me. I don't want you to do how I do it. I want you to do it your own way, but do it for us. Challenge for us. Speak out for us. Because if you do it, 2 others will follow. And if they do it, 4 others will follow. Again, my time is short, but I want other people to do it in their own way because they're going to inspire a lot of people so that by the time my kids grow up, hopefully they don't have to deal with this shit. Hopefully they don't have to deal with what we deal with.
That follower type of mentality, yeah, it is a thing in our community. It is definitely a thing for sure. That also happens when you've never had people with platforms like yourself who have been successful in speaking out. We haven't had a precedent like that set for us. So we naturally think that this is a bad idea for us to speak out. And I think a lot of us are scared of the liabilities. We don't want to get fired. We don't want to lose our jobs. We don't want to get ostracized by our friends. I think, our community is still, we're still learning, I think, what is the right form of activism that we need to take to speak up for our community. I'm curious, what your, professional opinion on the brand of Stop Asian Hate is. And the reason why I ask this is because I've had, friends complain to me that they thought, just the slogan itself was kind of lame. Not that it wasn't it didn't get to the point, but they just didn't feel it was catchy enough. And they just felt like it could have been better. When you look at how viral Black Lives Matter and Me Too was, a lot of that was hinged on just the brand in a way, the brand of the movements and what they stood for. And also the slogan itself as well. So, I'm just curious, what your opinion is on that.
I'm okay with it not being on t-shirts, you know, um, or, pithy, posters and stuff like that. I think it did what it did. It was a platform. It was a shell. And reality was it was originally Stop AAPI Hate, which eventually became a nonprofit started by Russell Jung out of San Francisco. And that's the original Stop AAPI Hate. But everyone's like, what's AAPI? Like, this is the first time we're ever hearing it. Maybe it was just say Asian. And so it became Stop Asian Hate. I think my issue with it was that it's not like necessarily just stop it. It's like, why start in the beginning? And maybe that should have been, the message. But I think the reality is it's that it means something different to every single person, just like Me Too and just like Black Lives Matter, right? And there are different spectrums of what it means to you. But the reality is that I'm proud of it because it started the conversation. It was us to build into it. Like any brand, you have a name for it, and it's up to you to build soul into it, to you build purpose into it. And I think, at least from my perspective, the Stop Asian Hate movement is a movement and versus a moment. And that's the only thing I cared about, was that I didn't want it to just be some little moment in time, that it awoken enough people to carry this forward, that it activated people who were so focused on assimilating, much like myself, so focused on just backing into the crowd of executives and just saying, I made it. But now saying, yeah, I am a prominent Asian American leader. And I as good as I am in marketing, as good as I am in business, I will also be just as good as advocating for ourselves now. And so I think it did what it was supposed to do, and it continues to do that. Or do we still use it all the time? No. And that's fine, because you're supposed to move on from it. It did what it was meant to do. And I think it awoken the right people, to carry us forward, hopefully to the next chapter of it.
That's a good point. It is a movement. It's not a moment, and it accomplished what it intended to do. So, what's next for you? You're involved with a lot of different initiatives for the AAPI community. You're part of Hyphen Capital, which is a VC firm that invests in Asian founders, Meta Prosper. You're on the advisory board for the Smithsonian Asian Pacific Center. And, I can really hear from you that this is what you're devoting kind of like the rest of your life to. Like, this is your calling. So, just tell us like what you're working on and what you're focusing on over the next few months or years within that space.
For me, it's to continue to scalably raise awareness for our community, whether that be through the work that I do through Meta and Meta Prosper. It's to hopefully give better routes, to people to find their voice. And, I've been proud to put a team together for Meta Prosper that has been all Asian female. And it was important to me that we did that because Asian females are typically a very vastly underrepresented community in tech, and ones that cap out. They cap out at individual contributor levels. And that wasn't okay with me, because I believe that, and honestly, if the team is listening to this, they are far better at what we do as Meta Prosper than I am. And I trust them to make the right decisions. I believe that they have higher ceilings that they give themselves credit for. And so for me, whether it be through Meta Prosper or my investment portfolio, I always encourage Asian female voices to find their voice, find their confidence, and understand that, they can easily be, they can easily dream bigger. They can easily achieve bigger. They just need better allyship and better sponsorship. And hopefully I could provide that to them. And I say that as a dad, to a little girl, who looks like them. I think she deserves to see these women thrive and succeed, so that she knows that she doesn't have a ceiling, and if that's the legacy I leave from my daughter, then I did my damn job. I think for us in totality, I'm very focused on making sure that we have a National History Museum for Asian Americans on the National Mall, one of the most patriotic places in the entire world for the United States. I think we don't have that right now. And so through the Smithsonian, I've committed myself probably the rest of my life, to making sure that we do get a place on the National Mall next to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, next to the Holocaust Museum, next to the National Women's Museum, because we deserve our place in history so that we cannot be erased, so that people won't forget of the atrocities that have happened to us throughout history, because those atrocities are deeply American. We forget that America is deeply, deeply racist and deeply, deeply unjust. And if we realize that history has happened to us, we will realize we're far as American as the Black community and as the Jewish community and as the female community and the American Latino community. Like we and the indigenous community too. Like we are just as American as all of them, right? And I think once you realize that, you can't deny that in history books. So to bring it all back, when a kid like me sits in a predominantly white town in second grade and opens up their history book and sees themselves, they will no longer feel alone. They'll feel like they belong. And this history that I just walked through for the past hour, hopefully will not happen for them.
It's critical. We need to know our own history. How's that been going? Coming up with the plans for the museum. I can imagine that must bring out, every like key decision maker from all these different ethnic communities in the Asian community wanting a say in this.
I've spent much of my career, majority of it in the private sector, right? And in the private sector, it's very, I would say, hierarchical, meaning that like as you rise, it's easier to make decisions on behalf of your organization. So things become a little bit quicker, hopefully, especially in tech. The Smithsonian was it has been one of the first ventures I've had in like the public sphere, not necessarily like a politician, but it's half publicly funded. And so therefore Congress has oversight. Therefore you have legislative bodies that have oversight. The executive branch has oversight. And therefore it becomes a little bit more complicated. And I don't know if I'll ever go into politics. I've gotten that push many times to run for Senate. I don't know if I ever will. I don't think I will. But the Smithsonian is as close as I get to the DC politics as I'm comfortable with, at least, because I realize, like you said, that every prominent Asian American wants to have a say, wants to contribute, wants to help us build it. But you can only do so much when it comes to the government. And so, I think we're getting faster. Obviously Grace Meng passed the bill to get a commission to study, what it would look like. I feel confident that that's going to show us what the future looks like over the next 5 to 10 years. But I could also say that because of all of this, and because of the momentum, and because of the great work of the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center, there will be more galleries inside the Natural History Museum, the American History Museum, that show us more of a proof of concept of what a permanent place on the National Mall looks like for us. And so, again, I'm confident that eventually I will see a museum, hopefully, with the Toda name etched in it. But if I don't, and it happens after me, then that means I really was the bridge that my kids could carry on. And that's the legacy that I do leave. They always say legacy is planting seeds you may never see grow. And that's fine with me, because at least I did more than probably what I was supposed to. I did more than probably what I was expected to. And to me, at least, if I could just get it that far, then someone else will take over. And that means it didn't just end with me.
Well, I certainly hope, you get to see the museum come to life in your lifetime. I feel like it will. Just might require a lot of, like you said, some political navigating. My final question for you, Eric, if you had a call to action for the Asian American community, what would you want to say to the community and to the people listening right now?
It's not over. This episode may be over, but what we're talking about is not over. What I'm talking about is for you to understand that we are in a larger awakening right now, that I want you to question, how you've treated other Asian Americans, how you've treated other communities, and if you've treated them in solidarity or if you treated them with scarcity. because it's going to take solidarity for us to have the future that we want. And I've been grateful to work with a lot of politicians, in my life, ones that are running for Congress, ones that are running for Senate, ones that, are in the White House. And the number one thing that we always talk about is, how do we bring more people together? How do we make them realize that it takes community support to get all of this done, and not, well, they represent another part of the community and not mine, right? Because the reality is, before we know it, every child will be mixed. They're not just going to represent just one community or another. That's just not that's just like sheer numbers, right? And I want to prepare us for that. I want to prepare, the world and our culture and our community for the reality is that we're so much stronger together, even though we need to understand that we've always been so insular. We always stop at our own community. But what's needed is better bridges with the Black community, better bridges with the Hispanic community, better bridges internally. Because hopefully, if my son and my daughter decide to speak up and decide to lead like how I do, I hope that the greatest opposition against them isn't their own people, because that is so tiring and it's so heartbreaking, and it really, really, really at times breaks my spirit that everything that I do might not be worth it. Because if I can't convince my own people to get behind me, but somehow I can convince other communities to get behind me, what was it for then? If I can't bring my own community together, but I can bring others together, am I really, who I am in the mirror? And carrying that is not worth it. Trust me. And carrying that every single day is not worth it. But I'm hoping that more people that listen to this specific episode, that listen to your voice, Hannah, understand that just because you have a country of origin, just because you have an ethnicity of origin, does not mean you only stick to that. In fact, it gives you even more credence to teach people about you, to build better bridges, and have them understand you in totality versus just you as a preconceived notion.
Why they wanna kill me in America? Is it me or is it... On the next episode of The Tiger in the Room, we talk to Doug Kent, a prolific political commentator on Asian American issues. We talk to Doug about his perspective on what is going on with anti-Asian hate, his thoughts on the WMAF phenomenon, why he feels Asian men are unfairly oppressed in this country, and the current state of Black and Asian relations.